Hi, this is Michael Arias, and today we're looking at Bitcoin on the long term here. Just before we get down into a bit of short term analysis. So, just looking at this in the way I potentially see the pattern overall, it kind of it kind of goes into this idea that we could be in a long term five wave move that's only still within wave three for Bitcoin. So what that means is, well, for starters, there's data that I don't have on this chart that happened from when Bitcoin started off. I don't have the potentially what is the wave one and two, the major wave one and two waves, um, and then obviously another wave one and two, which I believe ended down here. Now, this may the only reason I haven't gone with this idea before is because of the wick that went down to basically zero. So this would have to mean that the first wave two was around zero as well. So essentially, back when it was worthless, it hovered around worthless for a little while. That's one potential there. It could have gone to zero a couple of times before it actually started to make its move. And for this, it'd be great if someone could share some data of Bitcoin from from inception, basically from the beginning. I'd then be able to sort of understand the first couple of waves, one two, a bit better. That might add credence to this idea overall. In terms of the channel for wave three, the third of a third wave, to me, it also kind of highlights that we're not we're not seeing a top in Bitcoin by no means, simply because of the way that it fell out of the channel and it continued to correct the way that it has. Now, I've always maintained that basically we are in an ABC pattern, right? There has been some deviation from that, but originally I was always of the idea that this was a B wave, and it did turn out to be a B wave. The C wave has kind of shown that. Um, Even though it's expanded, it's still relatively weak for a C wave. But I'll get to that in a minute. So this particular way of, you know, displaying the channel and how it's fallen out, it kind of adds credence to the, potentially we have got further subdivisions missing, and that could definitely help understand what's going to happen in the future. So to sort of paint that picture a little bit, from what I understand about the waves, we'd have to see the completion of C, which may go a bit lower. I'll get to that in a minute. But then, obviously, we'd have to see another zigzag to the upside, which would be similar to the B wave. There's two. There's only two zigzags that move in the up direction, and that's B and D. And then we'd see another move lower. Depending on how big the D wave is, we don't know where that'll end. But yeah, it's really not a known thing, right? There's no rule for whether E wave can drop down towards to two in terms of levels. So we're not really going to discuss that. I'm just trying to give you an overview. So we need this four to occur, regardless of where it finishes, and then we'd be moving toward. Sorry, is that right? Hang on. Yep. And then we'd be moving towards wave five. All right. And how long that wave five will be is definitely not known, because wave one down the bottom here would have had to been a weak five wave move, which is never going to be indication of how high the last wave will go, because obviously it's a weak five wave move. So there's just no way of knowing that. Same with wave five. Obviously, if the green wave one was a weak move as well, right? Which would have been interesting to see at the time. I wish I could see that data. There's obviously, you could see how wave 5 expanded to the upside the way it did. And given that the fifth wave would be more of a major move, we could potentially see this type of price action probably just a bit longer in terms of that final move, right? We really don't know. It's nothing that we will know, but the potential is definitely there for something like that to happen. Actually, probably much larger than we could probably imagine at this point, considering that if we had to sort of draw the trend line at that point when that wave 4 ends, right? We'd have to know where wave 2 ended, and then basically do the trend line work for the end of basically wave 3, which is here. I think I didn't put that label in. I should put it in now. Wave 3 there. So I mean that's sort of always where I was heading with this, but that kind of puts it a little bit into perspective in terms of what to expect. And in that case, like, we just don't know if we will go to the top of that channel at that point, which would be absolutely insane if we ever did see that, right? Or maybe it won't go that high. Maybe it'll go a midpoint or something like that. Okay, so it's an unknown. But this is the kind of the way that the waves pan out. Um, in terms of correction, alternation. Well, once again, depending where wave 2 ended, where wave 1 began, how long was wave 2, might explain why, this wave 4 was only this length. Maybe wave 2 of wave 3 was more drawn out than the first 1 and 2, maybe. And maybe the reason why wave 4 up here is really extended to the sideways, like since 2017, might have been a short, very short correction for wave 2 from the first move, right? Now, obviously, I've blown that out quite a bit, but you can see where I'm coming from, perhaps. Otherwise, I mean, this is obviously it seems to be the case to me, right? Unless that's completely wrong and there is only, like, this is just a wave 1 and then this could be like a wave 2 that's going on now before we get a move higher. But I mean, you start to get into some really ridiculous numbers by that point. So um, look, you just don't know at this stage. It could be either or. So, but in terms of having that view, I think it's probably a bit wiser and not as bullish as you could get, because to get too bullish, I think it can be a bit crazy at times to do so, especially without anticipating much of a correction for something that's basically moved up in a straight line, but not really, right? So I do think that this is probably the most likely scenario. Um, and the reason for that is because you do need to have a decent correction after you see some level of weakness, as we have been seeing with the sideways movements, right? To some extent, that means usually that a market is struggling to keep going. It needs to correct properly before it does, right? Now, obviously, with Bitcoin, that can mean quite significant, drawdowns, but obviously, a lot of people don't really care about that anyway. It's just part of the game. So, just looking at the short term here, in terms of what's going on with this C wave, look, I've put not such a bearish view on this simply because I just want to illustrate something that could potentially happen. I think it's more important that we focus on the bearish view for this, just to understand that if this does happen, it could actually mean that we might see some kind of a black swan event that really sends all cryptos sharply lower, regardless of their patterns. That we know that Bitcoin seems to lead the way with this. So just looking at some moves at the lower end here, like I can see a correction being completed up until mid-December. And that to me just makes me wonder, is there going to be a large candle to the downside? Now, usually before we end a correction, we end off with a sharp move. For example, back here in 2018, back here in 2020, the market, Bitcoin tends to have like a sharp move before it actually uh, turns around and makes its next move. But it's not going to be a straight line up by no means. We are in a corrective process still, and I do think that we will see a D wave after this move down. Not to say that that's not bullish, because it can be for a certain time. Now, so basically, in saying that, each of these last moves seems to be getting longer somewhat, and I just believe that it will be wave five. I think will be longer than the previous two waves, which may make it seem like it is going to go much, 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 much lower. But what I think happens then is that it turns around. So this is look, up until that point, my previous view might still seem right, but something tells me that we don't really have. It doesn't seem like the US dollar has that much time to cause such a drastic move up right now. Okay, for example, I think we could be seeing some dollar weakness. And my previous ideas on the fiat currencies I've been doing in the last few days, week, or whatever, and just put those ideas out recently, I'll link them down below. I do think we're going to see some US dollar weakness, and I think it's coming for the next year. So 2023 dollar weakness. So what would cause such a move down here now? Not sure, but year ends tend to have significant moves, and they don't always mean that it's the end of the world. They can just be like a seasonal thing. They could just be just basically the pattern completing, some panic selling. There could be a raft of reasons. And when it comes to cryptos, there's no real fundamentals to go by. In my opinion, I think it's just all based on psychology. And I think that fear can really enter the scene when these things happen in terms of panics. So, what could cause a panic to happen right now? Well, there's a lot going on: higher interest rates, Tesla's crashing. There's a lot of things that people pay attention to that could potentially spook the market. Not to mention all the collapses that have been happening over the last year. And I think there comes a point in time where these things just make their move and people panic sell. But what happens after that is they just turn right back around. It just seems to be the way it goes. And so that's my less bearish view. Not sure how low this will go. It may not go that low. It may go to 10,000. All I know is there's got to be some kind of sharp move down that causes a reversal. So I'll leave it there for now. Hopefully you found this video interesting and informative. Thank you.